A long, long time ago in the land of England, there was a baby boy birthed out of his mother with a fag in his left hand and an England tattoo on his right arm. His first words were, "No one likes us, no one likes us, no one likes us, we don't care. We are Millwall, Super Millwall, we are Millwall from the den." Shortly after his first words were spoken, he stood up, chinned his dad, and walked out to terrorise the world of football. I cannot confirm whether this story is entirely accurate, however, with the Euros coming to a close and England fans in full force, I thought it'd be a good idea to look back at the history of English football fans, also known as football hooligans. The word hooligan is a term used for violent troublemakers, typically in gangs or firms. In England, hooliganism is almost entirely football related, apart from the vicious badminton hooligans of northwest London. Some articles state that the first instances of football hooliganism occurred in the 1880s, whereas others claim that it dates all the way back to the Middle Ages, with King Edward II putting a ban on football in London on the 13th of April due to the disorder and violence that accompanies matches, leading to distraction and civil unrest. King Edward III and IV also banned football in 1349 and 1477 for similar reasoning. Edwards and football were clearly not a match made in heaven during the 14th and 15th century. A number of other monarchs have also attempted to ban football unsuccessfully, such as King Henry VIII in 1540, despite ordering the first known pair of football boots. He must have received these knackered boots in the post whilst hoping for some vintage Adidas Predators. Hooliganism in the modern game of football dates back to the 19th century, with the first instances recognised as hooliganism occurring in 1885 between two of England's oldest clubs, Preston and Aston Villa. After Preston's 5-0 win, both teams were pelted with stones, punched, kicked, hit with sticks and spat at. Imagine having to deal with all of that and then getting a train back to Birmingham. A large number of organised football firms emerged throughout the 60s and 70s, with the most notorious being Millwall fans, otherwise known as Millwall Bushwhackers. This lot were the meanest, toughest and nastiest football firm about, causing absolute havoc wherever they stepped foot. On the 6th of November 1965, Millwall played West London side Brentford away at Griffin Park in a rare 2-1 victory for Millwall. Although Millwall ended up winning the game, one of their fans thought it would be a bright idea to throw a hand grenade onto the pitch towards the Brentford goalkeeper, Sheik Brodie, who picked it up and chucked it into his own net. Later it was retrieved by police, who determined the grenade to be a harmless dummy. However, I think you can see where things may have started to shift from a friendly rivalry at a football match into something much more serious. The 70s saw a rising presence of black footballers in England, which of course didn't sit too well with the Beans on Toast massive. With racial tension high in Britain and the far-right National Front peaking in popularity, a large number of these players were subjected to racial abuse from rival fans and sometimes even their own. That's right, fans would travel and pay to attend football matches just to shout racial slurs at their own players. It wouldn't be my first choice of supporting my team to a glorious victory, but I guess I'm not a Chelsea fan. Oh wait, yes I am a Chelsea fan, so I can't really even talk about this topic. In fact, the Chelsea Headhunters, what a delightful name, are probably the fan base with the biggest reputation of racism in football, at least in the modern game. Football hooliganism didn't stop there, as it reached its peak in the 80s, with 1985 being the most chaotic year to date, with several different instances of high-profile hooliganism taking place. The first of which started with none other than our beloved Millwall supporters, who took to the streets of Luton in their FA Cup quarter-final tie against the Hatters, described as one of the worst nights of violence in British football in a television news report at the time.
One of the worst nights of violence in British football. The Prime Minister is demanding action.
The bushwhackers ran riot all over Luton, smashing up cars and windows of local civilians' houses with anything they could get their hands on to use as ammunition, which for the most part happened to be bricks found in a bin outside one of the houses they had terrorised. In response, the Prime Minister at this time, Margaret Thatcher, decided it was time to take action by setting up a war cabinet to tackle this problem, as years of greed and incompetence had brought English football to an all-time low. This again, unfortunately for Thatcher and the rest of the United Kingdom, did not bode well for the future of football, as the levels of violence only increased throughout the year of 85, continuing with Bradford City's Valley Parade Stadium on May 11th, which led to a staggering 56 deaths of supporters as well as injuring over 250 others. Although this was more the fault of a poorly designed stadium and inadequate safety measures, 56 deaths and over 250 injuries was not exactly what I imagined Thatcher's government was hoping for as a response to the setup of a war cabinet. Only 18 days later, on May 29th, came the Hayeshill Stadium disaster, where a European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus resulted in 39 deaths and about 600 injuries. This occurred at the Heysel Stadium in Brussels before the game had even kicked off, as Liverpool fans were seeking revenge on the Italian supporters after the previous year's European final between Liverpool and Roma concluded with the Romans turning on the Liverpudlians due to a late Liverpool win on penalties. In the neutral section of the stadium, there was a mix of both teams' fans as well as neutrals, where Liverpool's revenge was imminent. They closed in on the Juventus fans, and as they tried to retreat, the Italians found themselves blocked in by a brick wall. The pressure proved too much and the structure gave way, crushing the trapped Italian fans and a few others. Blame for the tragedy was partly attributed to the Heysel Stadium, which was more than 50 years old. However, again, if it wasn't for hooliganism, none of this would have occurred. The disaster made English teams see a ban in European football for 5 years. 34 Liverpool fans were arrested, with 14 having been convicted of manslaughter, and 3 of those being sentenced to time in prison. Also, Liverpool lost the game 1-0.
Bosh, amazing, sick, great, fantastic. What else do you want me to say?
After a full year of non-stop anarchy, all English football fans came to the conclusion that football hooliganism should draw to a close, and football fans should just simply enjoy what is the beautiful game. Aww. Needless to say, the fish and chips ultras were not quite intelligent enough to realise this, and in reality, the exact opposite took place, as the rest of the 80s was filled with even more exciting ways of keeping the charming men of Britain occupied. Moving into the 90s, violence was coming off the end of an all-time high, but was on a slow decline due to it being cracked down on more by the police. A large amount of violence in English football started to come from altercations with other fans at international tournaments. France '98 World Cup was an international tournament where there was a high number of arrests due to hooliganism. 100 fans were arrested in Marseille after clashing with North African locals. When you compare this to the Heysel incident, where there were 39 deaths and only 34 arrests, you can see how hooliganism was finally being taken more seriously by the police. At the end of the 1999-2000 season, Sunderland topped the hooliganism table in the Premier League with 223 fans arrested that season. Tremendous effort from them. In the early 2000s, fans decided it was time to have a bit more class when it came to battering the shit out of each other, and this came in the form of fashion. Frequently worn items of clothing came from brands such as Shark, Burberry, and of course Stone Island. Prada and Burberry withdrew some of their garments over fears that their brands were becoming linked with hooliganism, while Stone Island nowadays is almost solely linked to football hooligans, and although it's still a very successful brand, its image has definitely been damaged by English football fans. When it comes to the amount of violence in football at this time, it was still on a slow decline due to English fans turning to international tournaments to cause havoc rather than in club football. After the clash between the French and the English at France '98 resulting in 100 arrests, England's travelling football fans were already in the spotlight, and after being accused of poor behaviour at Euro 2000, the England team were threatened with expulsion from the tournament. This must have cut deep with the Pie and Mash fans, as they really improved their behaviour at the following 2 tournaments and gained a good reputation for their hard work. They still, however, had 33 arrests at Euro 2004. Thankfully, in the modern game of football, hooliganism has been brought somewhat under control from the introduction of lifetime bans, CCTV, and all-seater grounds. Although 2019 saw the introduction of the world's biggest football hooligan in the form of Derek Diablo, otherwise known as America's first football hooligan. He is a true football hooligan trapped in a Floridian man's body, picking fights with Millwall. He even uses words like clobber and supports the mighty Inter Miami, which at the time of his rise to fame did not yet exist. Although this man is an absolute maniac, fortunately I think the rest of the US is safe from hooliganism becoming a serious problem. This graph shows arrests from football in England and Wales from the 2012-2013 season to the 2020-2021 season, which indicates that COVID had a big part to play in the sudden recent peak. Either that or Derek must have had a cheeky holiday in the UK that year to stir things up a bit. A huge increase to the numbers in previous years, not only those impacted by COVID but many of the years before that, which were on a slow decline. But hooliganism does increase when society seems to become depressed, so in all fairness, if you lock up a whole nation for 2 years, I think it only makes sense that people are going to come out swinging. Nowadays, with social media and the ability to broadcast whatever message you want to whoever you want, racism and other forms of hate speech towards footballers have become the main problem. Footballers like Reece James have come forward with screenshots of messages they've received from fans after a bad performance. Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka were heavily under fire from the media and from fans after missing penalties in the Euros final against Italy in 2020. And of course, with all of them being black English football players, they received a huge amount of racism on social media platforms, Instagram and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter claim that they take down abusive comments as soon as possible, however many racist comments are visible for hours after they are posted and therefore the damage is already done. Whereas this is completely different to old school hooliganism, it is dangerous because of how easily accessible it is to anyone with a smartphone, which is everyone, including this fella.
There are some foreigners that are coming over and taking our jobs, yeah, and not even working. And they're working.
They take our jobs if they're not working.
Because they do it. They do it. Simple as that.
Cocaine is also suggested to be a largely contributing factor for violence at recent football matches. Whilst it's always been in and around the game, as stated by the Offside Rule podcast, mentioning that modern fans are spontaneous, coke-fueled and still into the puerile hobbies of throwing projectiles and pitch invasions. Whilst this does sound like an absolute bubble, cocaine use only increases confidence and aggression, which is already sky high in football fans. Moral of the story is, lads, if you want to get in a bit of argy-bargy at the itch and scratch, keep it hush and don't let the old bill nick you. Cheers.